We all have challenges in life: sadness, broken relationships, anger, bullying, grief, and isolation. But there is hope. Together, we can learn how to bring back joy, re engage with life, restore relationships, and to be alone without being lonely. Welcome to Psychology Talks.
Thank you for coming back and finishing the discussion with us on navigating relationships with Dr. Julie Shaffer.
Hi, happy to be here again.
Yeah, thank you for staying on with us and finishing this very important topic.
Yeah.
So, when we were last talking about this, we were going over the rules that you present in your book about navigating relationships. So, can you refresh our memories on what those 7 rules are?
Sure. First rule is tell the truth sooner rather than later. The second rule is when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And the third rule is to always assume the best in your partner. The fourth rule is to know your limitations, to kind of understand yourself. The fifth rule is to own your own emotions.
Okay.
Number 6 is the past plays a part, but to stay focused on the present because the present is primary.
Okay.
And number 7 is to always be kind.
Very important one.
Yes.
But we'll get to that one in a little while.
Yeah.
Right now, we're talking about rule number 3.
Yeah.
So, we had started that discussion in our last show, and if you missed that, please look us up on Truth TV at YouTube, and you can see that entire part of the discussion. But we were talking about assuming the best in your partner.
Yes. And we talked about, like, if you're in a dating situation at the beginning of the relationship, but then there's this almost more troublesome situation that shows up when you've been in a relationship for a while and you know your partner and you know what they know about you, and it just seems that they're just doing this to upset you, whatever it is.
Right.
And that's harder because now you have to overcome this assumption that you're making.
Right. And also there's a history to base it off of.
Yes.
So it's not just an assumption based on information that you have from relationships with other people. It's an assumption based on a relationship you have with that particular person.
That person. Right. And you know that they know your buttons and you know their buttons. Yeah, it can be pretty sticky because you think you're right.
Right. And
yeah.
You may not be.
And you may not be. Chances are, if you think they're being malicious, you're not correct. That's what I've discovered in working with people. But it certainly doesn't seem that way in the moment.
Yeah. So how do you figure that out in a relationship?
Well, first, I think just tune into the fact that you're making that assumption. Like, I think my partner's doing this on purpose, and just notice that about yourself. Because that's where, if you can't identify that you're doing that, you're not going to change it. So first, just notice that you're doing it.
Yeah. And you might notice it because you're saying things like, that jerk.
Yeah, right. I knew it. I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew he would do that. Or you're almost having a fight with them in the bathroom mirror before you even bring up the topic because you know that it's going to be a fight. And a lot of times it has turned into a fight in the past.
Right.
But sometimes it turns into a fight because you approach it you come out with guns blazing, right? Yeah. And so, of course, it's going to be a fight,
right? Because
you're making an assumption about it.
Right.
So I like to get people to sort of take a step back, notice that you're making that assumption that they're being malicious. They're just trying to make your life miserable. Just notice that. And then you want to check in with your emotions, what you're feeling about the situation that's coming up and what you expect out of them.
Okay.
So identify your feelings there, and then set an intention for what you want to get out of the interaction. How would you really like it to go? Okay. What emotions would you really like to feel? Okay. And what would you like your partner to feel?
Okay. I really like that. I like that it takes it from, instead of anticipating a fight and preparing for a fight and being ready to struggle with it, that you're really setting out to say, this is the outcome I want to see, not the outcome I'm anticipating.
Yes.
So the outcome I want to have.
Yes.
And then to develop a plan on how to approach it based on what the good outcome would be versus this negative thing fight that you're intending to get into.
Right. I actually have a kind of a funny story to tell on myself about that very thing.
Uh-huh.
So I was married for 20 years, and we had a perpetual fight, as most couples do.
Uh-huh.
And that fight was over who was going to make dinner.
Uh-huh.
And there was always assumption that I was going to make dinner because I do like to cook.
Uh-huh.
So I was in the bathroom mirror one morning, just putting on my makeup and doing all that and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to make dinner, and I don't want to make dinner. I've got a long day. I'm tired,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. My husband, we have this fight,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting mad. And he was in bed asleep. He wasn't even participating in this.
Yeah, he wasn't even in the room, and the
Right.
poor guy was already getting blamed.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And then I noticed I was doing that. So I
Yeah.
took a deep breath. I said, well, what would I really want to happen? Really, what I would want to happen is for me to say, could you get dinner tonight? And for him to say, yes, I can.
Right.
And quite frankly, I wouldn't have cared what it was. You
So-
know, it could have been anything.
Right. But when you were sitting in the mirror and you were going through all of that in your head, you were already assigning something to him, and you had already had the fight. You
Oh,
had already had
exactly.
the fight in your head. And so
Exactly.
he was already guilty before he even said a word.
Exactly.
And you were also making an assumption that he wasn't going to do it,
Right.
that he didn't have a plan on it, and that he would know. So there's also
Yeah.
an unspoken assumption that he knows what it is that you need in that moment.
Exactly. Exactly. All of that.
Yeah.
I was doing all of that all at once.
Yeah.
And, you know, in everybody's defense who's ever been in this situation,
I have.
right?
I have. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And
I
obviously
have.
I had been. It was, we'd had that fight before.
Yeah.
So it was a reasonable assumption that we would have it again.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, if I went into it with that attitude, that's what was going to happen.
You were already, it was self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
You had already set it up so that way it would turn out that way.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So but I didn't want to have a fight with them. You know, who wants to have a fight with your spouse?
Right. Yeah.
So I took a deep breath and I thought to myself, what would I like to have happen?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like for him to say, I'd be happy to.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to feel like he wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I envisioned that happening,
Mm-hmm.
what that would actually feel like. And I kind of got myself into the state of him saying yes to me
Mm-hmm.
instead of the state of being in an argument with him.
Right.
And then I went out into the kitchen
Mm-hmm.
and I wrote a note
Mm-hmm.
asking him if he would please go get some takeout pizza. I was
Mm-hmm.
trying to make it simple.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't really care what I had for dinner
Mm-hmm.
so much as that I didn't have to figure it out and do it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know, because I didn't ever, it was a note I left him and then I went to work and he was still in bed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what it was about that, but he did it. It was so easy.
Yeah.
He went and got pizza and it was there when I got home. So
You set out the expectation.
Yeah.
And you actually verbalized what your need was.
yes.
And that's where I think a lot of us fall down, is
Mhm.
that we want someone to make an assumption. We want them to know us so well that they will just do what we want them to do
Exactly.
without us having to tell them to do it.
Right.
But that's
Right.
not realistic, is it?
No, no. I've said this to a few other clients. Last time that happened, we were in diapers. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So it doesn't really happen. People can't read our minds. You can't read your spouse's mind or your partner's mind or your sister's mind.
And
or your
it's better
mother's
that
mind.
way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
right?
It is. It is.
People don't need to know all the stuff that we say to ourselves or, because we sometimes say or think really strange things that we don't even really mean. And if
Right.
people really could read our minds, that would not be good. Not be good.
That's true. That's true.
So we are clear about what it is that we want without making an assumption that the other person's going to predict
Mhm.
what it is that we need.
Mhm.
And I really like how you did that. I like what you said a moment ago about you got yourself into a place where you could feel what it was like to have him say yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so your tone in the approach to him changed, where the tone in the note could have been, well, while you were sleeping,
Right.
right?
Right, and
Which
I'm going to work.
right, could have set up a very different outcome than you anticipating that, okay, he's going to say yes.
Mhm.
He's going to do this. He's going to
Mhm.
have a positive response. So I'm going to act like he's going to have a positive
Right.
response. And
Right.
so it changed your tone and your approach and how you were going to navigate that piece of the relationship with
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Absolutely. I fully believe that my belief that he would say yes
Mhm.
allowed me to write a note that got him to say yes. Like it just
Mhm.
worked that way. Because if I had believed he was going to argue with me, however I started that up would have
Mhm.
resulted in an argument.
Right.
So I had some influence on the process there.
Are there other aspects of number 3 of that role of making an assumption that we need to know about?
I think a lot of times when we're making that assumption, it's because we have a history of being angry.
Okay.
And um, I want to encourage people at that point to try to put yourself in your partner's shoes and to have a little empathy.
Mhm.
It can be very hard to do, but if you can do it, you can turn your anger into empathy,
Mhm.
then that can help you overcome that assumption.
How do we do that? How do we turn our anger into empathy?
Oh, I think it's about listening to your own emotional reaction. And there's this little thing that happens in couples
Mhm.
where whatever emotion you're having about a particularly difficult topic
Mhm.
is almost certainly the same emotion that your partner is having.
Hmm.
But we never notice that.
Right.
And so, one of the most common um, things for a partner to say, to come to me and say, oh, my partner doesn't understand me.
Mhm.
And I'll listen to their telling of the argument. And what I hear is, my partner didn't understand me and I didn't understand my partner. And
Right.
both people end up feeling misunderstood.
Right.
And being misunderstood is a really hard thing when you're in a relationship with somebody. You need to feel like your partner understands you. So start by trying to understand your partner. What's going on with your partner?
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's and to know that what you're feeling is likely what they're feeling, and that's your first clue. Then you can check in with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what's rule number 4?
Rule number 4 is to know your limitations,
Mm.
to understand yourself essentially,
Mhm.
to know your body,
Mhm.
because if you're feeling there's this acronym HALT. Have
Mhm.
you heard of it?
I have, yeah.
Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If
Mhm.
you're feeling that, it's going to be hard for you to make good decisions and to show up in an authentic and pleasant way in a
Right.
relationship. And you may have other things that get in your way. If you have a chronic pain condition,
Mhm.
when women start to go through menopause, or men as they get older, sometimes their testosterone declines. That can make a difference in their mood or anxiety level.
Yeah, and I really like this part of your book.
Hmm.
I love that you talk about what perimenopause is. I love
Yeah.
that you talk about some of these physical aspects that all people are going to go through in life, whether it's being tired, being hungry, you know, having a physical condition or a change in your hormonal levels based on your age or just your place in life. And so I think that's a very well done piece of your book that I think could bring a lot of relief to people to know this isn't just me. I'm not crazy. This is just what happens in life. And I need to figure it out and be able to adjust.
Yeah. And to recognize that your physical body is going to have an impact on your emotional health and well-being and your ability to show up in a relationship in a productive manner. Um, so yes, I talk about perimenopause. I talk about thyroid disorder because they look a lot alike.
Mhm.
And I talk about the importance of getting good sleep,
Mhm.
healthy diet, plenty of good clean water to drink, of
Mhm.
course, exercise, all very important.
Yeah, absolutely
Hmm.
they are. And so knowing yourself, so
Hmm.
being able to recognize, when you turn into Betty White on those commercials,
Right.
when you just need a break, right?
Yeah, right.
And so, can we talk a little bit more about what other aspects go into knowing yourself?
Um, yeah, so I think it's important to be able to say, I can't have this argument right now. And I've heard of this belief. I'm not sure where it came from or why it's a thing, but never go to bed angry.
Hmm.
A lot of people say that, and I'm like, well, actually, if that's your approach, you're going to be up all night arguing.
Yeah.
So, if you're feeling angry
Hmm.
and it's late in the day, you're tired, I would encourage you to table the conversation and come back to it when you're better able to have the conversation. So
Okay.
that could be in the morning, could be the next, later the next day.
Okay. Yeah, and I can tell you where that comes from.
Okay.
So there's a scripture that actually
Oh.
that actually talks about that. And so and I think the saying that I often hear is "Don't let the sun go down on your anger" or something
Mm-hmm,
like that.
mm-hmm,
But I think there's doing that takes some navigation.
mm-hmm.
Because if you just say, "I'm tired, I'm going to bed," probably
Right.
not the best way
No.
to leave things.
Right.
And so there has to be some level of resolution, at least an agreement that that's where you're going to leave it and then pick back up.
Right. And so I teach people how to take a break.
Okay, yeah.
And
Give us an example of how
yeah,
you do
so
that.
what happens? So you're having an argument, you're not getting anywhere.
Hmm.
And one thing I've noticed is any argument that goes on beyond an hour is likely not getting anywhere.
Yeah,
So that might be a good indication that it's time to stop.
yeah,
But anyway, at some point you recognize that the argument isn't getting anywhere.
yeah. And it may be that the argument isn't necessarily about whatever the issue is, that there's something underlying it that isn't being addressed.
Yeah.
And so I like that. I like that benchmark of an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, this has been going on a little
A
bit
little bit
long.
longer.
So
Yeah.
so let's figure out what the real issue is here.
Right. But if you're feeling, well, the technical term is flooded, but usually one of the persons in the relationship is
Mhm.
feeling overwhelmed and
Mhm.
can't engage in a productive conversation.
Right.
And maybe both people are by an hour. I don't know. Could
That's a long
be.
time.
um, to take a break. And so one person says, I need to take a break. I
Mhm.
need to not continue this conversation right now.
Mhm.
And so at that point, the conversation should stop.
Mhm.
And then the two parties should agree on when they're going to come back
Okay.
and try to pick it up. Now,
Okay.
some people can do that after half an hour. They just need to calm down and kind of get their thoughts sorted out, and then they can come down and be productive.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, what I've noticed is people need to sleep on it and then get up, then the next day after they've had a night of sleep, hopefully good sleep,
Mhm.
but their emotions seem to hit reset after that,
Mhm.
and they can come back to the conversation and be a lot more productive at that point. So the couple can decide, and then they come back. Then you have to come back to
Right.
the conversation.
Okay. Those
Yeah.
are great tips.
Yeah.
So let's go to rule number 5.
Rule number 5 is to is to own your own emotions.
Okay.
I don't think I said it that way the first time I went through them, but that's what the bottom line of that one is, and that is you're going to have emotional reactions. You're going to be triggered
Mhm.
by things that happened, possibly things somebody says or does because they've done it that way in the past and it triggers you, it makes you angry, or you've had a difficult experience in the past and something reminds you of that, and it just your emotions just flare up. So
Right.
that's one thing. It could be a less dramatic than that,
Mhm.
but you're having an emotional reaction
Okay.
to something. Well, you don't want to assume or take the stance that the person you're interacting with caused that emotion in you,
Okay.
because the emotion you're having is your emotion,
Absolutely.
and it's your responsibility to use that emotion appropriately.
So we're not blaming the other person when we get angry.
Right.
We're recognizing that the anger is in us
In us.
and that there could be something else triggering it other than the person.
Could be. Right. Yes. So
Okay.
past experience, and this is the situation that people get into when they've been dating,
Mhm.
and so they've had a relationship. Now they're back out on the dating scene, and they start dating.
Mhm.
They find themselves in a relationship with somebody who's doing the exact same things.
Mhm.
Like, what's that all about?
Yeah, it's just a mirror of the last relationship.
Yeah. And so what happens is you start treating that new person like the old person,
Right.
but they're not.
Right.
And it's important to treat everybody as themselves,
Right.
which you would want to be treated as yourself. So don't assume that they're behaving the way your ex behaved.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Introduce us to rule number 6.
Okay, rule number 6. The past plays a part, but the present is primary, which means it's really important to understand how your past experiences are trying to insert themselves into the present. And we need our past to tell us what to do and where we are and to navigate the world and relationships. But we need to understand the difference between what happened in the past and what's happening right now. And so that's the basic premise behind that rule.
Sure. So if we don't understand how our past is influencing how we act or how we make decisions, then we're going to keep making mistakes,
We are.
is
We are.
essentially what you're saying there.
We are, and we're going to end up in these patterns of these relationship dynamics that we don't like, and we won't know how to change them.
Okay.
And yeah.
And so part of that goes back to being honest.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to being honest with ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and being honest with the other people that we're in relationship with.
Yeah. Actually, in this chapter, I go back through all of the previous rules and show how they all play a role in how we're behaving in this relationship dynamic and how important it is to tell yourself the truth, to recognize what's happening, to assume the best, but to understand when your partners may or may not be doing something that's not going to work for you, even though you know they're doing their best.
Okay. So let's move on to rule number 7.
I like this rule. At the end of the day, you always want to be kind. And so when you're telling the truth, you want to do it in a kind way. And you want to assume the best in the person that you're talking to. But I go into a really in-depth discussion about what being kind is, because I think people believe that it's just being polite. And then how do you be polite if you have something difficult to say?
Absolutely.
So sure, being kind is being polite and trying to say something in a way that is not up to the best as you can, not upsetting.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to be respectful of the other person as an autonomous person who can make their own decisions. And so when you're telling somebody the truth, back to rule number 1, in a kind way, you may have to tell them something they don't want to hear. Right. You may have to say no and set some boundaries.
Right. And this happens in our lives all the time.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And even with people that we don't know well, it happens.
Yes.
And so doing it in a manner that has, and I like to refer to that as grace, having grace for ourselves as well as having grace for the other people.
Yeah.
Recognizing that people are going to make mistakes, that we're going to make mistakes, and then being able, and I like how you put that in your book, you say being able to forgive yourself for that.
Yeah.
And so, so I'm sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, that's
so
okay. That's no problem. I think that it often turns out that difficult messages, they don't feel kind. Sometimes setting boundaries doesn't feel kind, but in the end is kind. And I've had parents. I've been working with parents sometimes, and they've got adult children, and it's sometimes hard to set limits. In particular around substance use.
Right.
So when they've got a child that's, 20, 30 years old, abusing a substance, living at home, not working, and they're trying to navigate this, and you want to help the person.
Right.
You absolutely want to help the person.
Right. And you love them, you're invested in them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But sometimes being kind is if they get arrested for a DUI, is letting them be in jail overnight and letting them experience the consequences. Okay. You're not going to berate them, but that's part of the process, is experiencing the consequences of your decisions.
Absolutely. And I think the example of a child-parent relationship is something that, when you have younger children, you do that all the time.
Right.
But I think we sometimes lose sight of that when people are adults.
Yes. Yes. setting limits and
and
yeah,
allowing them to fail on their own, not being responsible for their actions, not being responsible for their emotions, allowing them to have the natural consequence that comes along with whatever the behavior is.
yeah,
And that could be trying to rescue. And I think a lot of people get into that habit of rescuing the people around them.
right, right. And it might be providing a roof over their heads. It might be paying a bill or
Right.
two, right? It could be a lot of things.
Right. And so I really like that distinction between what's kind and what's polite,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because I like that you draw out that kindness isn't necessarily doing for someone.
right.
It can be,
It can be.
but it's all going to depend on the situation. It's all going to depend on the relationship and where things are at for you and for the other person.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And that's where, and it does get hard,
Yeah.
but it's important to rely also on the other rules and, have the conversations when you're at your best and to know how you're reacting to what's happening and to tell the truth and to do it in a way that's effective and yet tactful.
And so, one thing that I really love about your book, Love, is that you really don't shy away from the pieces of the difficult aspects of a relationship. You don't shy away from talking about looking at your own hard stuff, but also it doesn't mean that you then take on someone else's hard stuff.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you don't walk with them through it, because it is a relationship and that's what you do in relationships. But it means that you do it together on an equal footing and not one person abusing or stepping over that boundary where you then harm the other person.
Right.
But also recognizing when you're harming the other person yourself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not about finding fault. It's about finding your place.
Yeah.
in the
Oh, I like how you
relationship.
said that. Yeah.
So you can find more information about Dr. Shaffer and her book at her website, and we will have that information on the screen for you. And thank you, Julie, for being here with us. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you and to really explore this topic of how to navigate relationships, which is so difficult for so many people, for all of
Oh,
us,
well, that's-
everyone. We're all humans.
Yeah, and that's why I specialize in helping people with their relationships because it is so hard. But I've had a good conversation.
Yeah,
with
and one thing that we didn't talk about before is if you're looking for a life coach, how do you find one?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, you can do a search online for a coach. That would be the place to start. There's the International Federation of Coaches, IFC, might be a good place for a directory
Okay.
to find somebody who's actually had some training in being a coach.
Okay.
Most of the time, you don't have to be any particular kind of
Discipline.
person or discipline to be a coach. So I would advise people to be discerning in who they choose. You want somebody who's got some training at least.
Yeah. So you want to look a little bit into their background.
Yeah.
See if they have a website or someplace where you can get a little more information about what their background is and where they're going to be coming from when they're making their approaches to you.
Right, right.
Okay.
And know that psychologists are licensed by the state, but coaches are not. So that is one distinction, that coaches aren't licensed by any particular body. And so you want to be very careful on who you choose.
Okay, yeah. But Dr. Shaffer, you are licensed by the state because you're also a clinical psychologist.
I am.
So thank you so much for being here with us. It has been a pleasure having you, and it has been a pleasure having you here with us today. Thank you for joining our conversation.